I don't need to run a 10 out of 10 for a company. Most companies are operating at a 3 or a 4. I just want to be a 7 or an 8. And if I can judge myself and kind of continually work towards really better than average, like then with the right ideas and the right timing, the right vision, you can actually win in the marketplace.
Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is a serial entrepreneur who is one of the OGs in the New York enterprise tech ecosystem. He's a visionary in the world of cloud infrastructure. His last company, Packet, pioneered the edge computing movement, ultimately leading to its acquisition by Equinix in 2020 for over $300 million. He serves on a number of boards, and he's also in the process of incubating a number of companies. In addition to his work as an entrepreneur, he's actively involved in nonprofit initiatives focused on technology access and innovation. Please welcome Zac Smith.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, David.
I'm excited for this. Let's jump right into the first question. So what's the one thing you've done, big or small, at the various companies that you've been CEO of, that you would absolutely do again in the future that really had the biggest impact on those companies?
No softball questions to start it off, man?
We go right into it.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to have been involved in a bunch of companies and managed to survive through about 20, 25 years of entrepreneurship. So needless to say, I've made a ton of mistakes. Along with it, I've made a couple of good choices or maybe happened into some of them. And the one that I'm most thankful for over my entrepreneurial journey is actually reading at the behest of my twin brother, who was annoyingly pushing me to not just use my gut in running a company, but actually to take a purposeful approach and use a system. In 2014, when we started a company called Packet, we used what was called Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS. It was a framework for how we could build a better company versus just build a better product or have the right timing in the market. And for me, if I could go back, I look at all the challenges and problems and missed opportunities I had throughout my various businesses, and that would be the single biggest thing I would do is go back to younger Zac and be like, dude, there's probably people who've run businesses before. Maybe you should see how they do that. And try one of those versus, stumbling around in the dark and trying to figure out how to run a company. So for me, EOS was just a total game changer in organizing my thoughts and taking a lot of things that were kind of native or felt, oh, that feels good or that, worked, and turning it into more of a system.
And can you, for people who don't know what EOS is, can you maybe go a little bit deeper into, is that just a set of meetings that you're supposed to have on some case? Like what is that?
Yeah, so EOS, you can apply it to all kind of businesses, but I think it's mainly, most useful for smaller companies that don't have a whole bunch of scaffolding. And so it starts with this kind of concept that you have to understand what's called your vision traction organizer. What's your purpose for existing? What are your values? What do you do the best in the world? And what's your kind of elevator pitch or mission statement that you could repeat? And writing that down on a one-pager, which you often kind of skip to, or maybe you're in the process of figuring out, but you haven't written down, is really good practice to start to gel around core values for a company. It then has a set of what's called a toolkit, which is, how do you have accountability? Not who does what, but who's accountable for what. So it helps you form a leadership team. And then running a process around kind of quarterly, what they call rocks, which is, do the big stuff first, not the little stuff. So you can make sure you absolutely accomplish the most important stuff at the expense of other things. Very important for a busy early business. And then annual 3-year, 10-year kind of goals. Writing those down, changing them, and then how to measure your business. So you're going along the path every week. You get together. You have a meeting every day. What are you looking at? Are we on track? Are we off track? Where we need help? So it's just kind of a toolkit around that. And then instituting some kind of processes around how to run a meeting. so you don't just have meetings that go on and turn into arguments about feelings. I had a great coach who helped me along this, and he says, remember, meetings are for getting stuff done and feelings are for the bar. So you have a lot of feelings about that issue, but do you have all the information to solve it? And if not, like, pause, stop talking about it, and, go get the information to come back and do something about it. But you can get into kind of emotional rat holes. And so just helping to keep on track there and give you some discipline. Because let's face it, Dave, like, building companies is busy. And there's a lot going on. And so if you can have a system to help keep you on track, the goal that I've always tried to do is I don't need to run a 10 out of 10 for a company. Most companies are operating at a 3 or a 4. I just want to be a 7 or an 8. And if I can judge myself and kind of continually work towards really better than average, like, then with the right ideas and the right timing, the right vision, you can actually win in the marketplace.
I want to just, that last comment of most companies are running at a 3 or 4 out of 10. I think that is, that is so important. Actually, I think most people, they think we have to do better with the product or with the this. Actually, at some level, you can execution just alone, just execution is a differentiator
100%.
for a business. And for most, to your point, most are actually running below average.
If you look at what's the number, like, statistically, the number of new businesses that fail within the first 3 to 5 years, a lot of this doesn't have to do with the wrong market or the wrong timing. It has to do with just bad execution. And you can overcome a lot if you're in the right place at the right time. And some people get really, really lucky and can even succeed in spite of bad execution. But I don't think that's the rule, man. I think that the vast majority of businesses, when you look under the hood and you look at a company that you respect from the outside and you peel it, and you've done interviews with probably dozens or hundreds of people, like, they got a method to their madness. They're good at executing, which might not just mean producing a product or servicing a customer. It might be making sure you hire the right people, making sure that you're pointed in the right direction, making sure that you know how to make decisions or deal with issues. These things are not sexy, but if you can get the mechanics of how to work as an organization to be, pretty good or great, I think that gives you a lot better chances at succeeding.
Do you, if you were starting a new company from scratch, is EOS something you put in place day one? Is that like, it's something from day one?
Yeah, probably day 0. Which, it's hard to kind of balance the concept of structure with and I come from a background of having some time in the arts. How do you have structure with free thinking and creativity? And so it is something that you have to kind of, meld in your own mind that, hey, I'm going to think openly and I'm going to be open to new ideas. I'm going to be, white space. A great part about starting a new company is you have literally, a friend of mine said once, early in the days of Packet, we had no money and no customers and, barely anything that worked. And he's like, you're so lucky. I'm like, what do you mean? And he says, well, this is the only time in your company's life where you get to spend 99% of your mental energy thinking about the future, because you have no past. You have no customers.
It's so true.
You don't have no bills. You don't have no vendors you'd have to deal with. You don't have a hiring and firing. You got nothing, which is amazing because it will go away. And so how do you balance that kind of vision forward, optimistic thinking with some structure that allows you to work off of a playbook? And so EOS for me is a good one. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it actually matters. I think there's a lot of great business strategies on how to run companies. I didn't go to business school or anything else like that. I went to the hard knocks of entrepreneurial life school. But, having some kind of system that you work off of, so that way you can improve it, right? So that way you have something to judge yourself off of versus it's working or it's not working, which is, I think, super subjective.
So one of the things you mentioned in this EOS is a couple of times now is like the team and building the team. Where do you start for some, like, I want to talk about kind of early stage as you think about building the team. Like, what are you looking for when you start that process?
Yeah. For me, I've always worked around vision. I'm a very mission-oriented human. I don't start a business thinking, you know, what I want to do is make X unit economics, and where could I do that? Or I'm looking to build a Y kind of revenue company. So what industry is best for that? I get passionate about ideas. I'm a person who just loves to solve problems. And so I kind of identify humans around me that have similar vision or passion for those same areas. Because I think you can learn skills. I think you can learn about things. And I've usually played in technology ecosystems where, what is it? The job application must have 5 years experience on ChatGPT or don't apply. Like it's all new, right? And I'm kind of counting that most things are changing rapidly. And so I'm less concerned about, you have tons of experience in this area as much as you're super passionate about it and want to learn. And then we can go on that journey together because, I like to uncover, I think, businesses when you're starting them, you have to have a kernel of a really, really, really big idea that you want to go and spend maybe 10 or 20 years working on. And I don't think there's anything quick about entrepreneurship. And so if you can have something that's, juicy enough and big, and you can identify a small team around you, then you can either figure out, who are the right folks that need to be on the boat, or is this one I build a business with? And then, at least this is something that I've worked off of is you got to build the right team. How do you do that? Right. So, okay, like we got this idea. We want to work on this major, huge, multi, year or decade problem set. I got some of the people who are so passionate and committed around that. Now, what do we actually need to do to be successful? And that is about forming accountability. And mostly if you've got the right value system where people are there for the right reasons, which is important. You can't get anything done if people are there for the wrong reasons, right? So if they're there for the right reasons, then you can start to say accountability, like who's going to cover what, so that we don't have to all do everything. I learned this in my very first company when it kind of went from that 10, 15 people, where everybody knew what was going on. You're all just kind of showing up, working hard, figuring out an idea. Everybody's got like the same, kind of brainwave, you're finishing each other's sentences, it's magical, right? It's awesome.
It is magical.
And then you get to like 30 or 40 people and suddenly it gets a little bit creaky and hard. And then like, I remember we hit like 80 or 100 people and suddenly everything broke because we were counting on this kind of tribal understanding and who does what, or why would we do that? And suddenly you're spending all your time explaining this. And so for me, that's where I've leaned on EOS is like accountability and clarity just helps an organization grow. And if you do it at the beginning, it's a muscle that is supernatural. If you try and inject it later, you've got all these bad habits of like, oh no, but Dave and I always like hang out and chat for 19 hours a day. And, now we know what's going on. Like that doesn't work like over time. And so for me, that kind of foundation of accountability and clarity of vision and purpose and values is like the number one thing.
Let me ask, so when we talk about passion, how do you identify that the person has the passion for what you're doing? Like how do you really, because I don't know, but knowing you can go sell that big vision. People are going to get excited. Even if they're not really that passionate, you're going to get them passionate. Like, how do you check that? How do you test that in the interview process?
Yeah. Well, it's easier when you have maybe a little bit of a product or maybe a community, or a constituency. I've done a lot of interviews in my life and, interviewing somebody who says, I'm super interested. I love this thing. I want to be part of it. And then you go and you like check out your free to sign up cloud platform and they've never signed up. I'm like, oh, really? Are you? Like, you haven't tried it yet. And it's super free or like not hard. And if you're here really wanting to be part of this thing, I would expect that you might have tried it. And so that would be a very easy litmus test. I won't hire anybody who hadn't tried. Like even senior executives who are like, no, I'm not technical. I'm like, I don't know. Like, that's why we have good docs, right? Like, like that would be a very valuable piece of feedback. Or open source is a great way to see that. Contributing in your community, participating, trying your product or participating. These are like cheat sheets, because they really like show when I mentor young people trying to get into new careers as like, just participate, just try, just, like it's easier to be authentic about being passionate about something than it is to pretend to be passionate about something, right? First off, you'll probably get found out. And second of all, like, it's usually pretty free and cheap these days to participate and try in most companies, products, organizations, or whatnot. Now, that's not exclusive. That doesn't work everywhere. For example, if you don't have a product yet, or maybe you don't have anything that people can participate in, how would you see that? And for me, it's generally about curiosity. I want to see if people have questions, if they want to know more. Certainly I can pitch people on why they should be. I'm excited about it. Let me tell you all about it. Question is like, how many questions do you ask about it? Like, what do you learn? Do you come back with like, but tell me more, and that will, same thing I do with my teenagers, be inquisitive, right? Don't just like put in your hand. I want to know what kind of questions do you have? And so my general interview format, which I'm super bad at interviews, is half the interview I'm asking questions, and the other half I try and shut up and just be like, what questions do you have for me? Like, what about the company? What about the people? What about the stuff? What about we do? I want you to ask me questions. You can tell a lot by the questions people ask.
There's a couple things you said there. First of all, I had my first job ever. One of the founders of the company, I remember I was interviewing to hire someone, and he went in I did the interview, and I said, oh, that person seemed pretty good. They seemed like it was a marketing job. And then he went into the interview. I'll never forget this. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I gave him the background, and he walked in, and no joke, it was like 3 minutes later, he walked out, and then the candidate walked out. I said, what just happened? He said, I asked them, what do you think we should change on the website? And they said they hadn't looked at the website.
And then he was done.
I said, why should I even have a meeting if you're coming in for a marketing job? So it's kind of what you're saying, like basic, simple things like that. I think that's a and for the people who are listening, because there's a lot of people, who are going for these interviews, who are maybe not doing the interviewing. And I think the part you said about the questions you ask, and I would go further, and I think you said it's like even the follow-up that you come back with of like, hey, we had this conversation, it was great. By the way, I went and did a bunch of work. Hey, Zach, I really enjoyed the conversation, but I also thought this, and this, and this. Like, how many people do that? I could probably count on two hands. I mean, maybe the best execs I ever hired did that. I mean, but in general, people, that it's back to the point of operating at average or operating above it. Like most people just don't even put that in. But I guess to your point, that they can't be passionate if they're not doing that.
Yeah. And I've certainly seen, people are busy and people have lots of stuff, and I wouldn't expect everybody to think about things as maybe at a company I'm running, they're interviewing
as much as
I
right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But if you're really interested, I would expect you to kind of not be able to stop yourself from knowing more, from checking out, from being easier. Hey, can I get a free account? Like, I want to try it. That's so big. And of course, me, or I think you, if you're a company, you'd be like, yes, of course, right? I would love you to try it, right? And so I think like that's pretty basic. And it's kind of unfortunate because I do think a lot of people, get into an interview process and they're really trying to prove their qualifications. And it's a hard, kind of maybe unfair power dynamic and whatnot. But I've found the best employees I've ever hired have been just active users or parts of the community or just super interested in the problem set. And frankly, after that, we'll work on your skills. Like, we're all in a place of learning. And so if we can hire for that, like obviously, and then I would always repeat going back to my EOS thing, I'd actually just read out my VTO. Here's our values. I just want to tell you what we're all about. Like, we're all about community. This is really important to us. Why do we do that? A, B, and C, right? We believe we're aggressive. We want to move fast, like like we want to win our industry, like whatever it is, right? And if you lay those out, a lot of people will say, actually, I'm kind of looking for, I got 3 kids at home and I want to travel and I've got this side project. I'm not really all in to that. And you're like, okay, well, maybe this is not the right company for you at this time, right? And so aligning first on values and then telling people very clearly what the big mission that the BHAG you're trying to go for, people will get attached to it or they'll be kind of just tactical. And I want the people who are attached to it.
Let me talk about the vision for a second, because I think that, you've said now a couple times, a decade, 2 decades, like you're going out. Um, can you talk about how far out do you go with that vision when you're doing that? And I want to kind of continue on that, which is also, how do you also execute today? Because that's kind of hard. It's like, hey, that's where we're going to be in 10 years, but we have to do this today, tomorrow, next week. Like, how do you tie those things together?
Yeah. Well, it's been an area that I've played in and built businesses around fundamental offerings, infrastructure, primarily in digital infrastructure, cloud computing, data centers, fundamental networking and software. These are long cycles. Nobody kind of adopts things in a heartbeat. It's not a consumer business, which might be, very quick to adopt. There's different businesses. I've mainly focused on kind of B2B or B to, what do you call it? B to
It's even
T,
bigger, right?
Yeah, like, fundamental enterprise, businesses where trust and long-term cycles happen. Okay, fine. And I would argue the world is moving quick, but, it's still kind of, I would say, almost impossible to time something within a year or two. Like, go build a product, a brand, get it to customers, and have that happen within a micro trend of a couple years, right? It feels like, what is it, February 2025? Like, it just feels like 6 months ago that ChatGPT came out. I don't know, it was almost 2 years or whatever. Like, man, time goes by fast. And so I find that if you're going to go build a business and you want to build something meaningful, which is, by the way, the only thing I want to work on every day, is to stretch myself. And so I challenge around a 10 years for me, the easy one, right? It feels good because and why does it feel good? It's far enough in the future that you don't have to actually think how you would accomplish it. Like, you can dream, which is that thing, like, oh, I mean, flying cars, like, I don't know, 2035 could happen, right? Like, like, I don't know how, but like, I could see it. And so, like, it allows you to kind of, what do you say, suspend disbelief for a minute and do a little, imagination, which is a great muscle. And I think that's where the most interesting ideas come from, with somebody, an entrepreneur, thinking like, well, maybe it could be totally different. And so allowing yourself that space to dream without conditions of practicality, I think, is important. And 10 years for me does that without being so far-fetched that you couldn't envision it in your own lifetime. And for me, I'm 45 years old. Like, I want to kind of still see myself in the future of this thing a little bit. And so the 10-year outbound it feels really comfortable. And then you can kind of, if you feel like you've got a good viewpoint, for example, when I started Packet in 2014, I do the reverse. I look back 10 years, so that helps me just gain perspective of like, well, was it really that impossible? In 2014, we started Packet. 2004-5, the iPhone was not even out. So like, I'm like, wow, like, my life is really different from pre-iPhone, pre-streaming video, like 2G, 3G, like, everything is different for me in 2014, where software is moving, rapidly, and cloud computing exists, and, people are highly connected. I was like, wow, I guess 2025, I didn't envision, generative AI, but I was like, why wouldn't we be talking at walls and stuff like that? It was a definite concept that I thought about. And so I think look back to look forward helps, just to give that kind of perspective. And then, once you do that, like, you kind of ground yourself around this kind of future thing, well, then you can start to, like, approach the innovation. All right, well, how would we get there? Okay, well, what can we do about that now to prove that thesis, or to learn more, or to build a foundational product that actually fits? And then you just use that 10-year vision as a litmus test on your decisions. So that way, as you're planning out your quarter, you say, well, is that going to get me to the 10-year thing? Like, am I going to make progress towards it? I'm not going to get there, but am I going to make progress? And part of that might get the right funding, find a first customer, build the first rev of your product. Like, that's all towards some big giant thing that's going to take a long time. And in like Packet's case, we wanted to connect hardware, no matter what it was, with a developer writing software, no matter what he or she was doing with it. And that goal was like, we envisioned specialized computers. We said, it's not just going to be Intel x86 boxes of 2014. It's going to be little ARM boxes. It's going to be GPUs. It's going to be specialized computers that software is going to move everywhere. How can we connect those two things? And that was the mission. And then we worked every day to be like, well, would that make that possible? And that allowed us to break it down actually pretty easily. And we had it was actually easier to disqualify things out. We had a couple of choices very early on, as early companies do, which is like, well, we would just kind of take a shortcut here. And, we'd make it work for the computers that are here today, like x86 boxes. And I said, no, that won't help us for software, no matter what hardware. I said, so we need to go back and make it multi-arch. So we need to support ARM64. Like, let's practice with an arch from the beginning. So we have both x86 and Arch64. And that was a lot more work. But we said, just doing it on one, it was not going to practice the muscle necessary for us to go to anything. So we needed to build a foundational offering that could think in multiple architectures from the beginning. So that was like an example of what we had to like stop, not do something that was actually a shortcut and work towards the larger mission, even in a very quarter.
How often would you tell the company the 10-year vision? Was it every month, every quarter, once a year?
I think communication rituals, are really important. And so for us, we had a Monday all hands that was highly scripted, 25 minutes.
Every Monday.
Yep.
Every Monday.
Every Monday at noon. And it was, recorded for our remote employees that were in different time zones or whatnot. And we scripted it pretty well. And the first 5 minutes was a culture segment that we hired a gentleman, Ty Gibbons, who was an artist. And he would record or make a song or showcase the art from our various employees that kind of aligned to our culture. And that was like how we instituted that.
Every week?
Every week. I mean, he made a 5-minute Tiny Desk concert, and he solicited employees who were great skateboarders or whatever, and he did stuff, and that was our creative outlet for kind of showcasing our culture, and that's where we repeated our mission and values around that. So it's not like hammering people, but finding ways that people would become interested in it.
What was I'm curious, what was the rest of the all hands kind of format?
Well, we always knew that like not everybody showed up on time. So the first 5 minutes was like, a song, a beatbox. We also did like mixtapes, just other ways to get people aligned with what our passions were, because we were all about the people. It was kind of one of our values. And craft, not crap, was an important thing. So we did craft, and we made time for that. And so our 5-minute all hands, and then we introduce new employees or anniversaries, people who had been around the company, so that a growing company would know each other. We reviewed our scorecard, which is like where we were doing. That was something we showcased transparently to our whole company.
Revenue, everything.
Yeah. Like the things that we were judging ourselves off of, we would go over, and then we'd have a time for if we had a special announcement or anything else like that. And then we usually showcased a customer or an employee story, and then we're done. Don't waste anybody's time was like mantra number one.
How long was the whole meeting?
25 minutes.
So would you run it?
Oh, if I ran it, it would be like 3 hours, and so, and it would be me talking. I had all these things, and then no. So Ty ran it, which was awesome.
Ty ran.
Yeah, Ty ran it. And I had my couple things to do on, and we all had a role. But yeah, 25 minutes, done. Start on time, end early if we can. And that was just because one of our things was velocity in the company too, and we're not going to waste your time. But it did give us, like, I'm going to call it snackable ways to keep the company aligned, help them understand where we were and make them, help them be part of the process with us.
I want to shift gears a little bit to go to market.
Yeah.
I think that's something that you are very good at, and you've done, to your point, with your particular businesses, the enterprise, the B2B, whatever you want to call it. Can we talk about let's start with how did you get your first 5 customers at Packet?
Mm. Well, there's something somebody told me recently in developer marketing. I always knew that I was targeting we in this kind of EOS VTO process. Who's the customer is a big part of the question. Like, what are we doing here, right? And we had a nuanced view upon that. Like, although we targeted a developer user, our customers were the top 1,000 technology-enabled enterprises of today or the future. That's what we were looking for, which means we were not building a product that was actually for everybody. It's pretty exclusive. Why were we doing that? Because I think it was hard for us to identify. We felt that the kind of biggest, most important companies of today, or that we're trying to become the biggest and most important companies of tomorrow, that actually helps you start with a 2-person startup, where technology is at the heart of their competitive advantage. And that allowed us to really focus in on who our features and whatnot were. So that was first and foremost, like, who's the customer? We were very clear on that from the beginning.
And was that list, those 1,000, was that a named
No.
list?
No, because like I can't predict all the 1,000 most interesting, companies of the future.
That's valid. Yep.
I mean, you could do the ones of today, but oftentimes I think as a startup, you'll notice that targeting like the super biggest companies of the world is like a way to get killed, right? And so we said, hey, that's our target because we see that they have complex requirements that really see that what we're going to offer and be the best of the world at is super important to them. But, they might not be ready to do it, but they might buy, some other company that is ready to do it and trying to take over that. And so we wanted to go for that user and that customer. And so first and foremost, like, understand who that is. And then what I did is me and some of my executive team, we spent a lot of time building our own like company and personal brand around this. We wanted to be the #1 trusted voice for the future of fundamental technology, to be used for software, no matter what it was. And so we approached this as a brand building exercise. And so I did a lot of, as I would say, like one-on-one. I'll convince the whole world one person at a time if I need to. But I did a lot of talks, a lot of speaking, a lot of writing, a lot of blog posts, a lot of Medium articles, a lot of commenting in, threads on GitHub. Like, I wanted to engage.
You personally.
Yeah.
You personally.
Yeah.
Like,
and that was like a huge part of my job, probably 50-60%. Now, that gave me a two-sided, not only could I help turn into the authoritative expert on this kind of problem set, I could also learn a ton, right, from the most interesting people. And so that was first step #1, because I firmly believe that big enterprises to small, they don't buy from companies, they buy from people. And I really needed to get some people to trust us in an abnormal way and go on a journey, because I was never promising that the product that you could use today was actually the thing you were buying. You're buying our future. You were aligning with us. And that's how, like, I think 2.5 years in, we won a contract with Sprint to power their mobile network, which is insane because they shouldn't pick us. But what they were trying to do was build a mobile network for the future. And they felt that we were the most aligned, and, that we were thinking out towards the same way they were. Now, it was an incubated project. They went and built a separate network from their kind of core consumer network, which was like smart, but that was like an example of how we won early customers, which, and that's different from users, because we had a ton of users. We wanted to create a free tier. We couldn't. Infrastructure is hard. So we gave out where we could to communities, open source ecosystems, et cetera. And then we made it as friction-free as we could for new users to start adopting our value and giving us feedback. But we never were confused. Actually, I had to explain this so many times to my board. They're like, look, you have like $100,000 in revenue. You've figured it out. I'm like, those are just my users who are paying to try and tell me about the thing. They're not my customers. That's not our target. They're paying. I value them. I'm going to support them. But that is not where I'm going. We've got like a multi-layer cake, because I got to get to the top, some of those. And it turns out, like, one of my first users was Mitchell at HashiCorp. And he, became a great customer and a great, I'm going to call it a future company, top company of the world based upon technology. But they were like him and Armand and like two people at the time. So it was not yet there. And so like sometimes this kind of like dichotomy of the user, which is adopting and testing and using and telling you versus your customer, which was Sprint, you know, they're not the same, right? And so that confused my board for a little while. So we got a lot of users, and then we started through this halo effect to get people who came to us and said, I'm really trying to run ARM servers out at the edge because I got this machine learning thing, or like, I'm trying to do this thing and it's not what the normal cloud computing can offer for me. Or, for example, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation came to us and said, we really want to build for multi-arch, which is what you're talking about all the time. And we believe in that too. And so then ARM came to us and AMD, and they said, hey, how could we work with you? And so that was how we got our first customers.
When you talk about being out there doing the talks and being, face to face and writing stuff on Medium, was that natural to you? Like, are you a good public speaker, kind of that you like doing that and that was easy? Or,
you know what? It's funny. I've become better at it. How about that? I love intimate conversations. It's my happy place. But most people would assume I'm like a huge extrovert, right? I think is what most people would assume. But I also went to school as a music performance major, where I always got nervous performing in front of people, but then you kind of learn to manage it, right? So you learn how to do it better and perform. And so I had to practice, and I was okay with that. But like public speaking, I used to get so nervous. Put me in front of a conference with 500,000 people, I get all clammy and stuff. And now I'm much better at it because I practiced it and, overcame some of those, insecurities and nerves and, became more confident in my own voice. And that's helped me over the years.
Yeah. I say all the time, I'm pretty open that I hated public speaking. Like probably, same, I would avoid actually good events because I didn't want to.
They were going to make you public speak.
Exactly. Like literally, I would avoid them, and it took me a long time, but I came to a realization I needed to. I think that is the real, and a lot of, and I'm not even, I'm not a technical founder. Then when you go to technical founders, it's usually for many of them even more challenging, and I tell people you need to, and I actually think especially in today's world, you need to have that brand. I think it's an important part of whatever you're doing. But I do think it's hard. But anyway, so I like asking that question to people because if someone saw you speak today, they're like, damn, he's amazing. And then it's little do they know that actually took work to get
quite a bit. And like it's funny because a good friend, Dan Kahn, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was the head of the CNCF. And he was an amazing, like he could give a keynote like nobody's business. And it was so good. And if you go look up some of his keynotes on Kubernetes and Cloud Native, they're just incredible. And he had the same thing. He practiced. I asked him, why are you so good at this? He's like, because I practice like a lot. I was like, and so that helped me too. Like, sometimes in the end, if it's a topic that I feel really intimate with, it's because I've tried it on 20, 30, 40, 50 times. And I'm in a place where I'm good, which was the same thing, by the way, when I was a music performer. If you hadn't rehearsed or practiced, of course you were nervous. But if you really were ready, like then, it got easier and you were able to overcome nerves or other things like that. So I suspect it's the same in sports or anything else like that where you're performing at a high level. And I would say as a CEO or a founder, this comes back to being an 8 out of 10, man. Like you gotta perform at a high level. It's a competitive market. It's hard.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. So I said in the intro, you're definitely OG of the enterprise tech scene in New York.
You saying I'm old and have gray hair? Come on.
No, I mean,
yes,
I'm old. I have no hair. It's what have you seen in New York? Like when you started, and you started your career here, like what was the scene like here, and how do you kind of compare that to where we are today?
Yeah. Well, I had a great mentor. I love New York. I grew up in Southern California, and I moved here when I was 17. And I just love the energy and density of this city, right? And the ability to interact with people of all walks of life because you rubbed shoulders with them on Broadway or ran into them, in the subway, or had to face the same, kind of urban, situation. So that is cool. My girlfriend, now my wife, at the time, used to get really annoyed with me in my early 20s because there was an elevator that we'd have to take over at like 190th Street where we lived, and it was like a very long subway elevator, like 2 minutes long, and I couldn't stand the silence. I had to be like, "Hey, what's your name?" I would talk to the name, and she was like, "Shut up! Like it's a stranger. You don't know them. They don't want to talk to you." I was like, "They're not a stranger. I just haven't met them yet." And so anyways, I take New York as having this kind of like density of people and ambition. Nobody said New York City is an easy place to be, so you can kind of align with that. So when I first got started in business, 2001, post 9/11, what I took advantage of was just the density of humans. But we didn't really have a density of technology scenes. So you had to go swim in other circles. There are a lot of finance, banks were kind of the king of the castle, right? And kind of real estate companies, other things like that. And so I remember I tried to get a lease at this office building. And I think Raj and I, my co-founder, we had to like keep going back to try and convince them that like having a tech company as a tenant wouldn't be a total death, sentence for them. It took us like a year to get them to allow us to put in a bid for an office space, because they're like, this tech stuff is just a trend. Like, it's just a bubble. I was like, all right. So in that way, it was really different. You didn't have a lot of camaraderie. There wasn't a lot of the startup ecosystem that you could lean off of. VCs, there was none, and so you would go to like a bank to get a loan or something, and then they'd laugh you out of there. And so it was kind of lonely in that regard. But then it was at the same time a little bit, you had to make your own audience. So meetups became really popular, and technical meetups and other kinds of ways to bring what was a pretty niche technology scene together, and that provided a great set of relationships. And then I just learned that, I had a mentor tell me we very globally minded. So we had built an office in Singapore. We had like locations in like 10 or 15 places for our product around the world. And I would always be like, oh, we need this customer in this market and this customer. And this friend, he told me, he's like, listen, you idiot, look out your window. We are down here in Lower Manhattan. He's like, there are like more companies within like your 6 blocks of what you can see than you could ever possibly deal with your entire company. Like, stop being lazy, get out there and go meet them. And that helped me. That's how I built my first business. We hustled to meet more people, and I've continued to live in Lower Manhattan because I can do 6 to 8 meetings a day. So even that personal network and capability to find new companies, new people, meet other perspectives, that's unrivaled. That's awesome. So I still consider New York a great place to build a business.
How do you feel it is now? Like now building, you're involved with a lot of companies and incubating companies, and how do you feel the market is now?
You mean specific in New York or?
Yeah, specifically in New York.
Well, it's no longer considered to be some redheaded stepchild of technology, right? It's now considered to be preeminently like maybe one of the top places to build a tech company. And so venture-backed businesses are not abnormal, which is great. There's a great and thriving venture capital scene. There's a lot of founders here. There are people who recognize that the diversity of businesses that we have in New York is an advantage. If you're building into Europe and other places that were a great place, a lot of people come through New York City. So if you have a cross section of customers and partners, New York's a great place to be like, next time you're coming by, which is usually on a regular basis, it's good, right? So I think New York's a great place to build a business. It certainly has its challenges. I still, even in the businesses I've incubated or participate, I go on founders trips. I go to the Valley. I go to London. I go and meet more, get different perspective. I think that's been super helpful in my own just like luckily in New York, we have kind of an international viewpoint anyways. And I think that really is aligned with the future of most businesses. So I think that's helped us. It's a good scene, man. It's fun. I wish this whole like commercial real estate thing would get figured out though, because I still feel like that there's this like weird setup that we could use to have better gathering spots. I think
100%.
that's hard. And it's unfortunate given like there's such availability of real estate in some ways. So
Yeah. All right. I want before we get to your background some more, I want to ask you the last question in this section, which is, what is the biggest challenge you've faced at any of the companies that you've started, and how did you overcome that challenge?
yeah. Well, when you preambled this for me, it came to me pretty quickly, right? And so
Instantaneously.
pretty much right away, right? And I'm going to consider it to be one of the hardest periods of my life, right? And this was my partner and I in my first company. I joined this company, Voxel, very early on. I was young, 21 years old, and Raj was the same age. We built this company. It was our life's work. And we both were, committed, as it were, and spending, 16, 17 hours a day working together to try and build this company, which we did. And 6, 7 years in, we had gone through this really hard period where the financial crisis of 2008 had actually been super positive for our business, because when people like funding dried up and capital and whatnot, companies, which was at the same time that the internet was growing really rapidly, right? iPhones were getting out there, cloud computing was starting to happen, applications and video were occurring, so like technology SaaS was starting to happen with like Salesforce and things like that. People were using technology a lot, businesses and consumers. But people also had this like huge capital problem. And so they outsourced. They outsourced to cloud computing. They outsourced to hosting companies and data centers like us. And it was on our balance sheet. And so we had to go spend the money. They were coming in. We had the best sales months ever during the financial crisis. But we didn't have any money. And we didn't know how to get any money. And what happened is like Raj and I were such diametrically opposed people in terms of how we worked. I don't think he checked his voicemail for 10 years. I responded to every email within 5 minutes. We were just very different humans. He stretched and dreamed about the future. And I was like, what are we going to do about payroll tomorrow? And in ways we were like great partners because we were different. And in other ways we were so incompatible. And we were fighting every day, right? To the point where it was like mommy and daddy yelling at each other it was uncomfortable. And we both wanted the same thing, but we didn't know enough about ourselves. And I think we didn't know enough about how to work with each other. And so we almost split the company and just left, right? And in the end, we decided to fire ourselves and demote ourselves. And we went out and both agreed. I remember this. We took a long walk around Lower Manhattan, and we basically agreed to hire somebody to replace us as leaders of the business. We needed somebody to come in and do a better job than we could because we were not able to do it. And that was so personal, for us. It was like our whole identity. I know it was for Raj and for me, and yet we wanted this thing to succeed, and that's where we agreed. And so, we ended up bringing in a CEO. It was a very hard process, but it was the best decision we ever made. In the end, we learned so much. The company, I would say, flourished to a degree, like met way more of its potential. And most of what I've learned in how to run a business came from that process. So, it was super hard. I didn't think we were going to make it. We almost sold the business for literally $0. I'm not joking. We went to Denver and we were going to raise this capital from this firm who shall not be named. And they were going to own like 65% of the business. We would get $0 out of it, and we would have to like re-earn our equity. And I remember coming back from there being like, screw this. We're not going to do that. we're going to make a different choice. We're going to figure it out and get somebody who can help us lead this business. And so that's what we did.
And did both of you stay? I mean, you stayed both of like.
Yeah, we both stayed. It was really interesting because we had to learn how to be managed and also be
Right,
accountable.
right.
And it was a night and day. I remember this gentleman who came in, Raul Martinek, great guy. I've learned so much from him. And just such a dear friend of mine now. And he came in, and like within a couple weeks, he was running a management meeting with us, and he was just like, "You idiots." Right? He's like, you have a business like that is in the right time at the right, right place at the right time. Your customers are literally falling over you to give money and like buy. You have all of the like right technology, and yet you can't just figure out how to get along so that you can win. And we're like, oh yeah, I should probably just do that, right? It's like, shut up. It was great. But, we were young too, right? I think maturity, like I was like learning how to grow up too, right? At the time, I was probably 28.
Yeah.
And when that's your only thing and your company is your life and vice versa, I didn't have a good outlet for a therapist. I didn't have anybody to talk to. So that was me and Raj just putting all of our energies against each other. And oh man, it's so much better. We're great friends now. Well, we've continued to work together. I've invested in his business, and him and mine is my like number one confidant, because we can so understand each other. And that's been a special relationship, but I thought it would break us.
What a story. So let me ask you, did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Like from childhood? Because you it sounds like you have kind of the arts upbringing,
Well, I always was, I was a kid. I have identical twin brother, Jacob, and I was always a kid who was hustling for money. I always had some side gig. I grew up in Southern California, so whether I was like mowing lawns after school or like, figuring out, I was teaching bass lessons because I played the double bass. I was teaching, like I was always finding a way to make a buck. And so I guess in that regard, I had some natural inclination, but I didn't see it as entrepreneurship. I got in this situation. My dad was in construction, ready-mix concrete, pretty blue-collar upbringing. And he lost his job during a big recession when I was right, like middle school, 12, 13. And I remember how hard that was. He didn't work for like 2 years because there was no work. Like he was in construction. He hadn't gone to college. That was he would be part of the a company, and they didn't fire him. They just like furloughed. And I remember how much that devastated him because he couldn't provide for our family. That's what he would desperately wanted to work, but he couldn't.
Wow.
And so, we were always trying to figure out how to help, make some money here, do this, never, whatever. And B, I kind of knew at that point, I always wanted to be my own boss. I thought, you know what? Like, I'm going to control my destiny, not be subjected to, in my dad's case, a union situation where they furloughed him because there was only X amount of work and they had to spread it around. And so I was like, I want to be my own boss. So that was kind of like innate in me. I ended up going into music and getting really involved in that. And frankly, funny enough, it's not that much different because as a musician, you're always gigging and freelancing. So, most musicians don't belong to the Philharmonic. Most musicians got to take church gigs and do this and that, which I was doing throughout college, high school, and then college. But then, when I graduated college, I was at Juilliard, and I was with like the 1%ers of the profession that I was wanting to be at. And yet, out of my graduating class of 100 people, one had a job. And I was like, those odds don't look good because I'm definitely not at the top of this class. I'm like somewhere in the middle. And so I'm like, if that's it, and I was like, wow, this is just a tough market. I loved what I did, but I just couldn't see myself waiting around for somebody to die or retire in an orchestra so I could fight with all of my friends to get the job. I was like, I want to be in a place where there's more opportunity and more expansion. So I looked to get hired. It was actually really hard to get hired as a Juilliard grad in anything, let alone in something that wasn't music. And so I said, I'll just make my own company. And that's how I decided to get into entrepreneurship, because I was like, well, if nobody's going to hire me, I'm just going to have to go do my own thing.
And you're still doing music today?
I am, yeah. In fact, I was at rehearsal late last night, so there's bags under my eyes. I'm going to give that as the excuse.
What do you do? Where do you play?
Well, I'm lucky enough to perform in 2 different community orchestras. One where we support emerging conductors. We're like their free orchestra where they get to rehearse. And the other is
Cool.
a chamber music orchestra. And these are all kind of non-professional musicians. They're people who went to conservatory or played. They're doctors, lawyers, tech entrepreneurs, whatever. And they play, the violin, or in my case, the bass. So it's really a pleasure. For 2 things. First off, I didn't play for 20 years. So when I started my company, I actually sold my bass. My mom got pretty angry. This is really nice. And used that money to start my first company, which kind of, I have to appreciate my mom for being so nice. Because here I had gone to Juilliard and done all this stuff. And then I was like, nope, it's on the bass. Gonna go start a web hosting company. So I didn't play for 20 years, but then during the pandemic, I stopped traveling and I picked it back up. And so it's been a great outlet to develop a hobby again. But the thing I appreciate most about playing in a orchestra is that, number one, everybody is a high performer. They practice, they show up ready to do it. It's a craft. You have to have either a combination of talent and grit and determination. So individually, people have to be exceptional at the thing they do, but then they got to come together and be completely selfless and follow the conductor and blend into the section, and everybody together now. And it's the only thing I've tried to, companies you've been part of, I've been part of, when they're like humming, right? Where it's just working and you're like, damn, like everything.
That's the best.
That's the best.
Yeah. And
yet the cycle for feeling that or figuring that out is actually quite complicated. And in an orchestra, you see it right away. Like you hear it in rehearsal. When it's happening because it sounds good, right? We're all hitting the same beat at the same time. If you're not, you're off beat together. That is actually pretty clear to see. Like even an amateur will understand that. And so for me, it's one of those scenarios where you can really work on a high performing organization and you get the result right away. In a company, it takes a while to feel that, right? It takes a while to figure that out or see the results of it. But when you get there, man, it's an amazing experience.
You mentioned before your family, your wife, your kids. Do you expose them to the businesses that you've been a part of, that you've started, what you do today? Like, are they part of that, or do you kind of protect them from the craziness?
I think my wife would say something. She says, I'm pretty sure he has something to do with computers, would be her description. When I was first starting a business, and I think this is the entrepreneur's, challenge, and I used to bring all of my passion and all of my pain and all of my frustrations back home to my wife and tell her all about it. She's like, how was your day? I'm like, let me tell you about it. And I realized pretty quickly that actually wasn't beneficial for her or for me. Number one, I was really just unloading a whole lot of my context so that I could have not like she could do anything about it, just to have the empathy. And that's just not how I wanted to spend the time and energy with my partner with. And so I stopped doing that basically. And I found other outlets with other entrepreneurs, mentors, other people where you could really go through all the, all the stuff, right? Which wasn't in my company necessarily, but at other people. And that way I could have a more measured way to engage with my wife around, how was your day, honey? But then over the years I've exposed my kids. I found that as long as I have that outlet that I can talk and share without having to go through, the 1,000 gun battles and tell you, 97 stories of this customer. I can just be like, here's why this is interesting, or here's what we're working on. And that can be enough that I don't have to bring, my kids or my wife through the whole thing. My kids end up being interested. I'm not shy. I expose them to what I do. I don't hide a conversation I'm having. I love it when they enter into a Zoom call,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's great. It's kind of what dad does. So, you know, I want them to be exposed as much as they want to be. And now I got my 15-year-old helping me do some of the books. And, like I was like, why don't you be
Love
useful? And
that.
he's like, what are you
Love
doing?
that.
And I'm like, I'm balancing QuickBooks. It's actually not glorious, but I will teach you how. And he's interested. So,
What are you doing now? I mean, you're doing a lot of different things. You know, what from a business perspective,
yeah.
before I want to go to the nonprofit in a second, but from a business perspective, what are you doing now?
Well, I've done a bunch of investing. So I've been fortunate enough to invest in 50 or 60 different early stage companies. Some are now, maturing, they're 10 years in. That's super fun. I've loved watching. I know I love the early messy part of company building. And so that's been super rewarding for me. But actually now I'm incubating my own stuff. And so over the past year, I've been incubating an open source business, really trying to put in practice some of the stuff that I've learned, and also the areas that I'm really interested in. And so that's been going well. It's fun. I'm building basically what would be considered a open source network cloud, like a way to connect businesses, apps, and kind of applications in an AI world together. I really believe in ecosystem connections and businesses around building more value and kind of a bigger tent. So that's been super fun. And then, of all things, I've been helping and participating in, and I'm not going to give all the details, but buying part of a professional sports team. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I
It's very,
won't
very
ask you for more
minor,
details now.
very small team. It doesn't have to be a big one, but I'm fascinated in brands, and I have watched. I'm not a sports guy at all, but I've watched it with my kids, and so I had an opportunity to invest in a Premier League team last year, and I did so, and it was really fun, and I loved the process of it. But it's kind of a way to lose money, and so. And so I kind of found a different opportunity that is a little bit more in my league, as it were. And frankly, I think it's a fascinating time for global audiences and like how, I mean, you probably watch your kids consume content. It's a little different
Yeah,
than
yeah,
how
yeah.
we consume
Very
content.
different.
And so I just think the times are changing. And with a friend of mine who had impressed this upon me, he's like, the cost of content creation is going to zero, through AI and
Yeah.
cloud computing and whatnot. That's just going to change who can access what, where it can get distributed to. But brands and experiences are still super important. So I'm playing around with that too.
Cool. And on the nonprofit side, because you do a lot, and actually, one of the groups that I enjoyed kind of helping has been Pursuit, who you introduced me to, and I had UK on this podcast, and
Amazing.
but you do a lot of that as
Yeah.
well. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I participate in a couple ways. I mean, I've always felt that it's really important. It's actually one of my, I'm not going to call it pet peeves, but hidden passions. How about that? That we have this incredible responsibility as entrepreneurs in the technology ecosystem. We've benefited from these huge societal trends, but not everybody gets to participate in those for various reasons. And how could we improve that access or help people through this really, really rapidly changing world? So as you mentioned, I've been a pretty long supporter and involved heavily in Pursuit, which helps people transition to careers in technology, primarily as a way to service economic mobility. How do you give people a path that used to be go to college or more, and now is probably get involved in technology and grow with that. And so giving people pathways into that. I participate in bringing some of my operational side and product market fit thinking to arts organizations. So I work with 2 different organizations here in the city to support them and figuring out their new model and their new audiences. National Sawdust out of Brooklyn, which is a really cutting edge avant-garde performance space, and the New School, which has the Schneider concerts that's been around for decades, bringing high quality chamber music to the masses at low cost, and how to keep that going. And then I have a couple of pet projects. Help the Matt Dunn and the Center for Rural Innovation how to bridge the rural economy, like centers of humans outside of New York and San Francisco who participate in technology and other great businesses that live elsewhere. I got attached to that because my brother, sister, and parents live in rural Vermont, and I really saw some of the true barriers just in terms of ecosystem density, connectivity, other things that really like got in the way of building. It's not like the people in rural Vermont have any less good ideas. It's just they didn't have all the same access. And so those are areas where I spend my time, try and take some of my business learnings to those organizations, and help them with that. And then of course with my, financial support where it makes sense, I do that as well.
Love it. All right, last question for you. Knowing everything you know, having been through everything you've been through, if you go back to the very beginning of your career and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, you probably couldn't tell it from this podcast, but it'd be listen more, right? It'd be talk less and listen more. I had so many people come through my life that I could learn more from. And oftentimes when I look back, I was too busy to tell them kind of what I knew, which was not a lot. And so I think surrounding yourself or putting yourself in positions where you meet incredible people. I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of those by happenstance or whatnot, or some hard work. I just listened to them. I'd be tell me more about you. It's like, I thought about this podcast. That's what you're doing right now. And I just so appreciate it, is you're asking people to tell their stories, and you can learn so much from other people's experiences. And we just have one lived experience, but we probably met 100 people in the past month who have one. So listening more, I think, is super valuable. I tell young Zac to do it.
If people want to connect with you, what's the best way? Email or LinkedIn, or what's like the best way to connect if they want to?
I'm not on the X. I'm not on the tweeters, or at least if I am, I don't remember my handles, so don't go to it. LinkedIn is great. It's Z Smith. I'm on there, and would love to hear from anybody if they have questions, opportunities, things that they want to share. It'd be great to connect. And thank you so much, Dave, for doing this and for having me around to talk.
Thank you. This was awesome. I'm excited. I learned some new things about you, in this process. So thank you. And for everyone listening, I hope you enjoy, and please share this with your networks and subscribe, all of that, rate the show, and we'll see you for the next episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.